Hello and welcome to New Filmmakers Los Angeles in partnership with Movie Maker magazine. I'm here with Julia Gorbach and Nathan Phillips with their film, Closed Up. Let's take a look at a clip. Thank you so much, Julia and Nathan, for being here with us today. Congratulations on this amazing film, which is really a sign of the times. It was so interesting to be able to watch something in real time that we're experiencing during this global pandemic. So Julia, if you can give us a synopsis for our audience that hasn't been able to see it yet.
Yep. Really happy to be here. So Closed Up is a short documentary. You could call it a hybrid, about a fictional video call that features 20 technologists and artists and experts all in a lockdown at the beginning of April as we investigate together how to exist online. However, as the film progresses, this hyper-real video call becomes infected with a virus and takes over everyone's cameras, blurring the lines between reality and fiction, leaving us all asking, well, what happens next?
Yeah, and that's kind of where we're at right now, right? You shared that, this happened, early April, and we were in the middle, really the beginning of what this pandemic is and how it was affecting our life. At what point did you know what the story needed to be and what it was evolving to be as a film?
Yeah, I think I was actually just thinking about this because I think it's really easy to forget the process once the project's over. So I had to sit down and really ask myself, well, how did it begin? And it began with a prompt from Nathan saying like, hey, look around, what's happening? We're all living online suddenly, like in this documentary, observing one another every single day in video calls. Like our reality went from this physical reality with some elements of digital existence to suddenly everybody became, like everybody started to blur the lines between our existences. Suddenly it was digital, it was physical, and times virtual. So I think in the beginning, we had a lot of different ideas of what kind of project we can do. And eventually it ended up turning into interviews with different types of experts, sociologists or authors who were studying like empathy and technology, and different types of people specializing in existing online, creating online, etc. And it was really about trying to understand how are they processing this right now. And so we had this list of questions we were asking everybody, and the question list evolved with each conversation. And there were 20 different interviews that were one-on-ones. And it was challenging in the fact that there were just so many different ways we could have told the story. We could have focused on different social issues. We could have focused on identity, etc. But I think eventually when we had those 36 hours of interviews and we transcribed all of that and started to like pull out the most interesting things, it was a process of constantly cutting until it had to be what it had to be. And I think there was a moment when we made a choice to focus on the technological aspect of the story and how we were all existing online and what that meant. But that came, I think, a few months into it. Yeah, it was definitely a lot of writing and then a lot of stripping down, There was 1 month when I definitely felt like I was living in the Matrix and I lost everything. But I'm curious, Nathan, like what do you remember from that moment?
Well, I don't know if you saw, my daughter Louisiana came in and she's got a starring role in so many calls that I'm on. And I was like, oh, you can't talk right now. This is an interview. And she's like, what's an interview? And then she like walked out and she asked my wife, Victoria, like, what's an interview? She closed the door. And the really cool thing about the fact that like we even consider this a story is that we all simultaneously as a human culture started to exist in a mediated reality. And it's exactly like if we all suddenly were on a TV show together, or if we all like decided to take some sort of psychoactive substance simultaneously, and we're all like, whoa, like they put it in the water, this is what's up, we're all in it. And the story is the fact that this is different. I think what was cool for us was we just were able to articulate it for ourselves really early on, which is like, oh, this is a documentary, we're in it, right? Being in a documentary like / reality show changes the way you behave. It changes the way that you consider yourself. Suddenly we all have the opportunity to be Kardashians every single day. And then it also allows us to observe people, and like our emotional intelligence like all of a sudden gets dialed up to 11 because I can just like watch you the whole time so intensely, or myself, and see my weird face, and just like for 8 hours, Monday, Tuesday, I take Wednesday off, Thursday, I spent the whole day like, and you get so much intelligence about stuff that you just did not have exposure to. And so for us, capturing the idea like, oh wait, this is a documentary, allowed us to process all that information, all that curiosity, all of that like, you know, kind of wandering philosophical chaos that we were all experiencing of like, what's going on? And we're like, no, we're in a documentary right now, and we're watching a documentary, we're making a film about it, right? I think that part we were able to grab the reins on early on, but in terms of like how we were going to express that, like what the outcome was, that I don't think we really knew until it was done. But it definitely, at least for me, and I like, I don't know, I think based on our conversation together, Julie would agree, like, we knew what the movie was about, but we didn't know what the movie was until the end. We knew what the movie was about the whole time though.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the things that we were sharing, you know, off camera was this idea of Zoom fatigue, right? And that even though we are all these months in, and what you were talking about, you know, like time, like we're living in this weird vortex of this year feels like it's been the longest and the shortest year I've ever had, you know, in my life. And that it's not something that is this new way that we're living and that we've gotten used to it, right? Like some days you're like, oh, okay. And like yesterday, you know, I just was talking, it's fine. And then boom, like something happened to my brain and I just kind of hit a wall. And unlike being in a shared physical space where, you know, you're part of a group and you can kind of regroup, everybody's watching you, you know, just like you said, Nathan, like all eyes are on you all the time. And I know, you know, as I have a background, you know, in dance. And so even just physically, how my body, where I receive energy and where I'm present in my body, it's so different because even when I close the camera, I just feel everything right here. And I like literally have to like be mindful of connecting to like the others, bringing life and energy to my legs. Do you want to add something to that, Julia?
I was just saying that the word presence was coming up for me a lot when I was having these one-on-one conversations. It was like, how can you be present online? A lot of people aren't even able to reach presence in real life, like tangibly. How can you be present online? And every single conversation was really intense because suddenly you had to be really dialed in and just like nodding and giving much more than you would. And so you were performing and you're performing all day and it's exhausting. And it's a different type of performance, like you said, because your body in a way doesn't have the same role. And it's much more your face in your mind.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting. I mean, with us, working in film, sometimes we just have the experience of being behind the camera, and then when the camera's, turned on you, it's a whole different experience. And we work in this industry. And if you think of people who are just normal, everyday people, who just shy away from that, attention, or they're, introverts. And this is that they're forced to have to communicate this way. What was the experience as you were doing these interviews? Because you guys had a whole scope of people with different backgrounds and experiences, professionals who were parents, or parents who, like you, Nathan, are also navigating this world, this new world for your child. With the questions you asked, a lot of people are experiencing different traumas, right? Whether it be just living in this new world, losing their jobs, losing loved ones, dealing with social justice issues. How did you as filmmakers hold that space for these subjects to be able to share their story and not be overwhelmed, with almost therapy sessions, I'm sure, in some points, while you two were also like in the matrix of experiencing this, because that's something that is so unique to this project?
Yeah, I think that the key was to really first be really grateful for their time. Some of these people were some like contacts or friends of friends. Some of them were completely cold calls. I had researched them. I thought, you know what, you would be really an interesting person because of your specific, unique like perspective on the world and what you've studied. So I would love to understand this from like a scientific perspective, from like a human perspective. So it was creating space for experts, but also people who were not necessarily experts, but were artists, to share their personal experience, and then to share their more like high-minded conceptual like exploration as they tried to explain this moment. And a lot of them were having difficulty. And I felt that each conversation became one, actually. Conversation after conversation, it all started to feel the same. And it was Groundhog Day for me a little bit. But it was important. And each conversation took 2 hours. And it wasn't on purpose. It could have gone even longer, but I think it was just for that as well, like to give them space to express themselves, for us to explore and have aha moments. I think the questions I was asking people evolved over time because the interviews took, I think, over a month and a half. So the questions we started out with changed. And it was because every single person and what they were saying and experiencing and what we were discovering together was also evolving.
And something on that actually kind of goes back to what you mentioned about being a dancer. And it hadn't occurred to me, but both Julie and I have dance backgrounds. And there's something really interesting about the idea of like an embodied movement. And when I think about an embodied movement, I think about it as like an intention which is physicalized, right? Like, so I present as like, I have like I present as the way that I present, which is like, I'm a 6'1" tall Jewish New York dude who has like a creative job, and I get away with a lot because of the way that I present. But when it comes to the way that I need to embody that, a little bit, not completely, and far from it, but there's a moment where a lot of the way that we embody ourselves for the camera shifts, right? Because I maybe was in a position of power when I was existing in organic reality or biological reality when we were all in rooms together. But maybe I'm really bad at it, or maybe I can't emotionally handle the experience of being outside of that and being taller than people and being louder than people. So when it comes to the camera and this mediated reality we live in, there is this embodiment of identity that happens. And I think in the interviews, but also like when it comes to Zoom fatigue, there's been this really amazing shift, and it has it's limited by access. It's limited by social norms. It's limited from the starting points that we all entered into this environment. But there has been a shift where there has been an opportunity for people to embody a position of power and other people to not have that capability on Zoom or on Hangouts. And that power dynamic has shifted. We've talked to some women who say that in this mediated reality, they've used the opportunity to kind of normalize some of the gendered, power dynamics in a room, because all of a sudden everyone is silent to listen to the speaker. And I think one thing, and again, I'm saying everything as the guy who's like rolling deep with the identity that I carry with me, but like I think it's really interesting to think about what this means for how we present who we are, and the fact that by adopting technologies, by adopting filters, we can actually shift some of those things in ways that we can't in everyday reality. So like Julia, for example, is in black and white, right? That's not nothing, right? Marissa, you've got the posters, right? One of them has your name on it. I'm in this shitty room. All of a sudden, like, this is not, like, I wish I was in my real room is not there, but my kids are there. So what does that mean for just human conversation when we have to manifest a presentation of our identity while also maintaining ownership of these tools? All of us, all the 6'1" tall cisgender heteronormative dudes who were rolling into conference rooms being really good at it, some of us were not good at it. And I think that is an interesting cultural moment. I hope I navigated that thought in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
No, I thank you know what, and thank you for sharing that, because I really think there's huge value in that, and you being able to share that from your position of power. And the mute button is something, even as women, especially as a woman of color, I wish I could carry around, in real life, because it is forcing people to have to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a really great point of this conversation, that thank you for bringing it to this space, because a lot of the times when we think about these calls, we think of everybody, talking over each other, but also having to take a moment and a breath to unmute yourself also, changes the energy, and almost having to be really given permission. And from people that have never had to ask permission, it definitely is a new space that we're in. So quickly, I want us to touch base on, because you talked about, all of these hours and hours of interviews that you did. And what we see in the final film is something that's familiar to all of us, right? All of these Zoom boxes all at one time, but you didn't shoot it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what was that editing process like?
Yeah, I think like when we had that aha moment that this was actually a video call, and Nathan, you had said, oh, it was in front of us the whole time. It was so obvious. And it was. Of course, we were having one-on-one conversations, but the whole thing and how to bring it together, because this was a collective shared experience, the first we've had in this millennial together in the technological era that we're in, it had to be together, right? So building out the Zoom call, well, it wasn't a Zoom call, building out a video call, incorporating some frameworks and some rules from the different digital spaces we exist in now, like how does Zoom work, how does Google Meet work, etc. We ended up crafting a little bit of a rule set for ourselves and some design principles, essentially. And then we started to edit within that framework, and it changed some of the lines. Some lines were actually cut because we realized we could show it visually in a way that we couldn't show it previously, because now we had 9 tiles in a scene in a moment, and one visual correlated to another visual in a different way, creating like a lot more subliminal messaging as well. So overall, it was an interesting exploration of how to craft a video call when it wasn't originally shot that way. And it was much more challenging than we anticipated. And it took months. It took months because it was very difficult and it had to be built in After Effects. And then every single piece was then imported back into Premiere. And any change you made, you'd have to go back into After Effects and it would take hours to render. And it was just this process of you're in the edit room with the editor. You're like, cool, this needs to change. And we're like, yes, we know, we'll do it later. This needs to change. Yes, we know, we'll do it later. And so then you have all this list and you just wait to see what the render looks like. But then when it started to come together, it was a really cool moment.
And
go ahead, Nathan.
So I was just going to add that one, I think we came to the project with this point of view, but it was proven correct, which is that a lot of the time we humans get a new piece of technology and we're like, oh, like, yeah, this is my phone. Like, I totally know how to use my phone. It's like, you don't know how to use your phone, right? So when we talk about editing and we talk about all of these programs, a lot of the time we treat them like the process of what we're trying to do, but they're not, they're the tool. So part of the editing of this film was also us behaving differently. And I think one really major thing about this movie is like we created 2 digital products for our everyday life because of what we learned making the film. One was we realized that we couldn't all watch it together. So we made a thing we call Watch That, which is a screening tool, which allows us, like, Julia can send out a link to everybody in a chat, and then she hits play and we all watch something together, right? And it's like, oh, of course that should be a thing, right? So like we built that tool because we needed it. And we also made a button that we call Express That, where like on these calls, we've become good at like miming feelings, being like, right? But like in a room, you're like, oh shit, like good idea. Like, so we don't have these tools of expression. So we've just muted ourselves. So we made a button, and again, we share it on a chat, and then everybody on a call can hit the button and it plays a piece of emotional feedback for everyone on the call. And whoever's presenting can pick the feelings. So it can be interested or excited. And they're able to modulate the emotional response, and then everyone can hit the button. So we're able to just like have a human relationship. So I think like this is a documentary, this is real life. This actually is just like a photo capture of what occurred. But like we also edited the documentary that we're living every day. Like we edited our lives in service of this film because we realized like we really were quite locked into these boxes. And I think our everyday life on Hangouts or Zoom has been really transformed because of the film, because it's like really quite vibrant, because we made these toys to play with.
I also just wanted to do a quick shout out to the crew and to the cast of real life humans who are experts and everything and living through this experience. I think in particular, there were a few things that we utilized in the film that were really crafted. The visual language of the forward-facing mechanic, where we showed people's emotional and mental spaces and the different digital and physical spaces they were existing in. And then the data mosh effect, which is this blend pixelation of images that kept blurring and kind of glitching out as the film went on, because the film essentially had a digital virus. And it was this idea of what happens if the virus escapes the real world and permeates into the digital world. And so I think like the editor that we worked with did a really amazing job at constructing that. And it was really challenging. And then we had an amazing set of composers who essentially created a soundscape that blended analog physical sounds with how they sounded within a digital internet space, and what happened when that entire space essentially like deconstructed and we went into the matrix. So there were really key elements, both sound and visual and music, that helped piece together the feeling of anxiety, the feeling that we get from watching that film and being really present in it.
No, absolutely. And all of that really translated and came through beautifully, you know, as an audience member. So congratulations, and thank you to your entire team. And I look forward to being able to use those features because I mean, we're here. This still isn't going away anytime, soon. And I want to thank both of you and, your entire team for creating this film and giving us an opportunity to talk about what we are experiencing in so many new ways, and inspiring new conversation, and inventing new things that are going to be able to help us during this time, and as we move forward and navigate through this year, and really moving forward, because life will look different, and in a lot of different ways. But thank you both. For all of our audience, thank you for joining us today on behalf of New Filmmakers Los Angeles and Movie Maker Magazine. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.